You won't believe how a simple Thursday afternoon in October turned my quiet life upside down. It started with my son-in-law stopping by and ended up stirring feelings I thought were long gone, making me question everything in the most unexpected way. I would never have thought that this could happen to me. Don't repeat my mistakes. It all began on a Thursday afternoon in mid-October. The kind of day when the sun falls in golden, slants across the backyard, and the wind smells like dry leaves and distant fireplaces. I was folding laundry in the sunroom, half listening to the hum of a daytime talk show. Life had become quiet since my husband passed, and though I never said it aloud, the silence often felt heavier than I could bear. My daughter, Carrie, had married young, just 22, to a man named Michael. At first, I wasn't sure about him. Too polished, I thought, too charming. But time softened my opinion. He was patient, thoughtful, and always so respectful toward me. Maybe a little too perfect if I'm being honest. Over the years, I found myself noticing things about him I shouldn't. The way his eyes lingered when we made small talk. How he laughed at my dry jokes even when they weren't funny. It was nothing at the time. Or so I told myself. That Thursday, Carrie had called to say she'd be running late from work, and could I let Michael in when he came by to pick up a package? Of course, I said yes. I didn't think anything of it. I made some tea, put on a cardigan, and waited for the doorbell. When he arrived, he had that same warm smile he always wore. His coat still held the chill of autumn air, and his scent, a mix of cedarwood and something faintly citrus, followed him inside. We chatted briefly about nothing important, just as we always did. But then, right as he turned to leave, he paused. "There's something I've been wanting to say for a long time," he said, standing in the threshold, hands shoved deep into his pockets. I looked up from my teacup. "What's that?" He hesitated, and I saw something shift in his face. Vulnerability, maybe. Or conflict. "I think about you more than I should," he said finally, voice low. "I probably shouldn't be saying this, but it's been eating away at me. You're unforgettable." My breath caught. I felt the blood rise to my face. An involuntary flush of heat that left my fingers trembling. There was a long aching pause. I should have laughed, should have told him to go, called Carrie something, but I didn't. I just stood there, heart thudding, confused, and suddenly aware of how long it had been since anyone had looked at me like that. "Michael," I started, but there was no sentence to follow. He stepped forward slowly, carefully, like he didn't want to startle me. "I'm not trying to disrespect you or Carrie. I know how this sounds. I see you. You're not invisible. Not to me." And then he left just like that. The screen door creaked closed behind him, and I was left in the quiet, still holding my teacup, the steam now cooled and curling like smoke. Asterisk, for days I replayed the moment in my mind. His eyes, his voice, the way he said he saw me. I couldn't shake it. Not because it was scandalous, but because deep down I realized I had been starving for that kind of attention. Not romantic, not even necessarily physical, but to be seen, to be acknowledged as a woman who still had desires, thoughts and dreams. Not just a mother, a widow, a placeholder in someone else's life. I tried to convince myself it was nothing. A moment of weakness on his part. I wouldn't tell Carrie. Of course not. It would only hurt her. It wasn't worth destroying her trust or her marriage over a few words, whispered in the air like smoke. Still, a part of me, one I wasn't proud of, hoped he'd say something again. And he did. The next time I saw him was a week later at Carrie's house. She was running behind again. She always was. And Michael offered me a glass of wine while we waited. I accepted, though I rarely drank. We sat out on the back deck, the sky painted in orange and lavender. He didn't say anything immediately. We just watched the sunset. The kind of easy silence you only share with someone who's grown comfortable in your presence. You seem different today, he said, glancing at me sideways. Do I? I sipped the wine, aware of how warm my skin felt. Lighter, happier. I smiled. Maybe I am. We sat in silence. Again, the breeze carried the scent of fallen leaves and distant grills. Somewhere in the neighborhood, a dog barked twice, then stopped. I wasn't imagining it, he said finally, turning toward me. What I said last week. You felt something too, didn't you? I wanted to deny it, to shut the door, to slam it, and bolt it tight. But something in his voice, in the gentleness of his question, undid me. Yes, I whispered. I did. He didn't move closer. He didn't reach out or say anything bold. He just nodded slowly, eyes fixed on mine. I don't want to hurt anyone, he said. Especially not you or Carrie. But I can't keep pretending that I don't care about you, about what we had or have. I know, I whispered. Neither can I. He reached across the table to refill my wine glass, and for the briefest second our fingers brushed. The air shifted. I looked up, and so did he. Just then, Carrie returned, holding a tray with tiny glasses of panna cotta. She paused in the doorway, eyes flicking between us, that intuition flaring up again. The next day, she called. Mum, she said carefully, can I ask you something? My throat tightened. Of course. Has something changed between you and Michael? I froze. The silence between us stretched long and thin. She filled it. It's just he looks at you differently lately. And you? I don't know. Maybe I'm imagining it, but something shifted. I didn't know what to say. I couldn't lie. Not outright. But I couldn't tell her the truth either. Not all of it. You're not imagining things, I said finally, my voice soft. But it's not what you think. It's complicated. She was quiet for a moment. I don't know what I think. I just know something's there, and it scares me. I wanted to reach through the phone and hold her to tell her that everything would be okay. But I wasn't sure that was true. Later that evening, Michael called me. Not a text, not an email, an actual call. I think she knows, he said, voice heavy. She doesn't know everything, I answered. She doesn't have to, he said. It's enough that something's off. I sat in my darkened living room watching the glow of headlights pass across the window. We need to stop, I said. A pause. Do you want to stop? He asked. I don't know what I want anymore, I admitted. But I did know. I wanted him, and I hated myself for it. The next few weeks were a blur of awkward visits, careful words, and heavy silences. Carrie kept inviting me over as if trying to prove that everything was fine. But the tension hung between us like a fog that never quite lifted. One afternoon, Michael showed up at my house unannounced. I had to see you, he said, standing in the doorway with rain soaking through his jacket. I feel like I'm losing my mind. I let him in. He sat on the edge of the couch, hands clasped, like he was afraid to touch anything. We didn't speak for a long time. Finally, he looked at me, eyes tired and full of something like sorrow. I never meant for this to happen, he said. But I can't keep pretending that I don't care about you, about what we had or have. I know. I whispered. Neither can I. He reached for my hand, just resting his fingers on mine. No kiss, no embrace, just touch. A quiet, aching gesture that said more than any words. And I felt it again, that deep, warm hum beneath my skin. The reminder that I was still here, still capable of feeling of longing. I don't want to hurt Carrie, he said. Neither do I, but I also don't want to live half a life anymore. His words sat between us like a dare. That night I didn't sleep. I sat in my bed with a cup of tea, staring at the framed photo of my late husband on the dresser. I remembered the way he used to brush my hair behind my ear when I read at night. The way he smiled when he poured my coffee. He was a good man, but he'd been gone for years now, and I had become something of a ghost in my own home. Michael had reminded me I was still flesh and breath and soul, that the cost of that reminder was becoming clear. 2 days later, Carrie showed up at my door. "Can we talk?" she asked. I stepped aside to let her in. Her eyes were red, but she hadn't been crying. "Not yet. I asked Michael," she said. "I asked him what's going on." My heart fluttered. "And he didn't lie," she said. "Not really. But he didn't deny it either. He said, you two understand each other in a way he's never understood anyone." She looked at me then, not with anger, not with betrayal, but with something worse. Disappointment. "I don't even know how to feel," she whispered. I reached for her hand. She let me take it. "I never wanted this," I said. "Not like this, but it happened." She said, "Yes." She stood up, wiping her eyes. "I need time," she said. "I don't hate you, but I need space to figure out what this means." She left without hugging me. After the door clicked shut, I sat back down, alone with the storm of consequences I had helped create. I didn't call Michael that night. I didn't answer when he texted. I needed time too. Time to decide what I was willing to lose and what I was willing to fight for. I had no answers. Only the awareness that something inside me had changed forever. The house had never felt so still. After Carrie left that day, the silence settled into my bones, echoing louder than any argument ever could. I walked through the rooms like a stranger, running my fingers along the edges of picture frames and empty vases, noticing dust where I hadn't before. Even the wind outside felt quieter, as if the world itself was holding its breath. I didn't hear from Carrie for a week. No calls, no messages. The absence cut deep, sharper than I expected. When you raise a child, you always believe your bond can withstand anything. But some wounds don't bleed. They just quietly bruise deeper than you realize. Michael texted once, "I miss you. Are you okay?" I stared at the screen for a long time, before finally typing no, but I will be. I didn't send it. Instead, I went on walks. I cleaned the attic. I started cooking again. Not just microwaving leftovers, but really cooking. Meals with flavor and spice and thought. Something about working with my hands grounded me, reminded me that life still moved forward, even when everything inside me felt stuck. It was during one of those walks, an early morning with dew on the grass and a chill in the air, that I ran into an old friend from church, Ellen. She was walking her dog and greeted me with a warm hug, and that signature tilt of her head she always used when she knew something was off. "You look thinner," she said, concerned. "Everything all right?" "I've had a lot on my mind," I said honestly. "Want to talk?" I surprised myself by nodding. We sat on a bench near the duck pond sipping coffee from her thermos. I didn't give her the whole story, not names, not details. But I told her enough that someone had come into my life unexpectedly, that I had made choices I didn't know I was capable of, that my daughter was angry with me, and rightly so. Ellen listened without judgment. She didn't scold or advise. When I finished, she looked out at the pond and said, "Life's messier than people let on. Love even more so." I could have cried from the relief. That conversation gave me just enough strength to face the next day. Because that afternoon, Carrie called. Her voice was cautious, but not cold. Can we meet? We chose a small cafe downtown, one we used to go to when she was in high school after her dance recital. The smell of cinnamon and fresh pastries hit me. As I stepped inside, she was already seated, 2 cups of coffee on the table. She still knew how I took mine. We talked. At first, it was light, work, weather, small things that tiptoed around the larger weight between us. Then, finally, she took a deep breath and looked straight at me. Do you love him? I didn't answer immediately. I searched my heart, afraid of the truth and afraid of what a lie might cost. I don't know if it's love, I said, but it's real and it matters. She nodded slowly. Her fingers toyed with the handle of her cup. You were always more than just my mother, she said after a moment. I knew that, but I didn't want to think of you as someone who still needed that kind of connection. I didn't think I needed it either. I admitted until I realized how long I'd been pretending not to. Tears welled in her eyes. She brushed them away. I'm angry, she said. But I'm also sad because I don't know what this means for any of us. I don't either, I said. That I'm here and I'm still your mother. Nothing changes that. We left the cafe with a hug. Brief, but real. Not forgiveness, not yet. But the beginning of something softer than resentment. That night, I sat in my kitchen sipping tea, thinking about everything that had happened. About the man I had grown to care for in ways that defied reason. About the daughter who still held a piece of my soul. About the woman I was becoming somewhere between the past and the future. I picked up my phone and called Michael. Hi, I said when he answered. His voice came through warm, surprised, hopeful. Hi, I want to see you, I said. But I need you to understand something. Anything, he said. This isn't about escaping the life you have or running from your marriage. If we move forward, it has to be honest. It has to be real. No more hiding. And if that means walking away, we walk away. But if we stay, if we explore this, then it's with open eyes. There was silence. On the other end. Then slowly I understand. I want that too. We met the next day, not in secret, not in the shadows, but in the open, a public park, a sunny bench, just 2 people figuring out who they were and what they meant to each other. He told me he had spoken to Carrie too, that they had had a long, difficult conversation, that they weren't sure what came next, that there was honesty now and pain, and maybe the space for healing. I don't know what the future looks like, he said, reaching for my hand gently. Neither do I said. But I'm not afraid of it anymore. That night, I slept through the night for the first time in weeks. Not because everything was perfect, but because I had chosen to stop hiding from my own heart. I was no longer a ghost in my own life, and neither was he. Winter came early that year. The first frost arrived in late October, dusting the grass with silver, etching delicate patterns on my windows each morning. It was the kind of cold that clung to your bones, but inside something warmer had taken root in me. Not passion, not fantasy, but something far more grounded. Acceptance. The days passed slower. Carrie and I spoke more often, though never for too long. She asked about recipes again, sent photos of her new throw pillows, and once even asked me if I needed help with the gutters. That was her way of extending an olive branch, not in words, but in gestures. I accepted each one quietly, like a woman accepting rain after drought. Michael and I were careful. We saw each other in daylight, met for coffee, or walked in public gardens, always aware of the limits of our time, the fragility of what we had. There were no declarations, no promises, just the deepening comfort of being understood. He wasn't reckless. He wasn't running from his marriage anymore. He was standing still listening, and so was I. One afternoon in mid-November, he brought me a book. It wasn't wrapped, but it was clearly picked with thought. A worn hardcover collection of poems by Wendell Berry, one of my favorites. He remembered. I found it at a used shop, he said, handing it to me like a confession. Made me think of you. I held it in both hands, the scent of old paper rising from its pages. I opened to a dog-eared poem and began reading aloud. The words sat between us like something sacred. When I looked up, his eyes were damp. You make me feel like I matter, he said softly. I reached across the table and took his hand. You do. It wasn't about age anymore, or guilt or right and wrong. It was about presence, the kind that doesn't vanish in a storm. We were two people who had stumbled into an emotional intimacy neither of us had expected, but both of us needed, and in our own quiet, careful way we were letting it unfold. Of course, there were days of doubt, nights I stared at the ceiling, wondering if I had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed, wondering if I'd ruined my daughter's trust forever. But every time Carrie called, whether it was to talk about work or a new recipe or just to hear my voice, I knew we were still finding each other slowly. We were building a new foundation. Shaky but honest. Then came Thanksgiving. Carrie invited me. She said it like she wasn't sure I'd say yes. You don't have to come, she added. I just thought you should know you're welcome. I'd love to, I said, swallowing the emotion behind those words. I wore a forest green sweater I'd been saving, one that brought out the grey in my hair and the softness in my eyes. I brought my famous cranberry orange muffins and a bottle of white wine. When I arrived, Carrie greeted me at the door with a cautious smile. Michael stood in the hallway behind her, holding their dog in his arms, as if the familiarity of it might soften the tension. In the air, dinner was lovely, awkward in parts, but real. We talked about old family stories, laughed at the way the turkey came out a little too dry, passed dishes back and forth like we hadn't tiptoed through a minefield just weeks earlier. At one point, Carrie got up to refill drinks and left me alone with Michael in the kitchen. We didn't touch. We didn't need to. Thank you for coming, he said quietly. His eyes filled with something like peace. Thank you for making room, I said. He nodded, and for the first time I sensed he was ready to step back, not out of fear, but out of respect. For Carrie, for me, for all that have been. After dessert, as we stood in the doorway saying goodbye, Carrie wrapped her arms around me in a tight hug. Mum, she said, pulling back just enough to look in my eyes. I know things can't go back to how they were, but I'm glad you're still here. That you're still you. Tears pricked the corners of my eyes. I kissed her cheek. I'm always here. On the drive home, I rolled down the window slightly and let the cold air hit my face. The sky was a dark velvet blue dotted with early stars. The quiet didn't feel heavy anymore. It felt earned. Michael and I still speak now. And then, a message, a thoughtful article shared. A check-in about how Carrie's doing. But that chapter of whatever we were, it's over now. Not with regret, but with reverence. We stepped into something extraordinary. And we stepped out with our hearts intact. I've learned something through all of this. Life doesn't always hand you neat resolutions. It gives you contradictions, and it dares you to sit with them, to live in the grey, to let go of shame and embrace complexity. I've made mistakes. I've hurt someone I love, but I've also rediscovered who I am. A woman not defined by age or loss or sacrifice, but by the simple, beautiful truth that she still feels deeply. To anyone who's reading this or listening, or maybe just quietly wondering how you got here, don't lose yourself in the roles others assign to you. You are allowed to feel, to want, to change, and maybe, just maybe, to start over. Even if it's not the way you imagined.